What's going on, everyone? So, it's your boy J Scott checking in for another episode of the J Scott Ascension. The reason I'm here with you today is because I like to discuss what was recently happening with Joe Rogan and the controversy he's in, not just over ivermectin, but now the collage of footage that has recently been released, showing him saying the N word a bunch of times on old podcast episodes. So I'm also going to be tying that into how it relates directly to critical race theory. So stay tuned because I think, you'll find this a little bit of a different take than a lot of other takes you're hearing out there. So as far as Joe Rogan goes, to me, I like to judge a man by his actions and not necessarily by his words. So while words do mean something because they're how you present yourself to the world, words can be misinterpreted, whereas actions are usually the best way of really seeing what someone is really about. So if you want to take a look at Joe Rogan's most recent actions, which I think should weigh a little bit more into consideration of this whole experience to his old actions. His recent actions include the fact that he has not used the N-word, since those old clips that were pulled up from the early 2000s. And in addition to that, he's been actually shedding light on systemic racism, which is something that most people don't really fully understand. And I know the phrase triggers a lot of people, but he's used his podcast to highlight the faults of the criminal justice system, which have been used to over criminalize the black community. And that has a bunch of knockoff effects, including taking men out the home and putting them in jail and then making it hard for them to get jobs once they get out of jail. Over policing of black communities has systematically put black men in a tougher position to get ahead. And Joe Rogan has spent several interviews interviewing different people who were involved in the fight in different ways. And I've also seen him essentially bring up an argument in favor of reparations without using that word when he was speaking to Ben Shapiro. And I think it's a good, play to get people to listen to the ideas, because as soon as you say the word reparations, you're going to get a lot of mixed reactions from people. That's a very charged word. So, but if you listen to his conversation with Ben Shapiro, he points out multiple times that communities that have been neglected and, face systemic problems that other communities haven't faced haven't really been invested into. And a lot of the money America spends winds up going overseas. So what he did is he's challenged people who have opposite viewpoints from him that actually, in my opinion, reinforce the structures of systemic racism that impact the black community. And he's used his platform to, bring that to literally the biggest audience imaginable. So the war on drugs and criminal justice are just two examples. If you look at what MLK, was supporting before he died, it was actually the Poor People's Campaign, which was the unification of working class people, no matter their race, to push for workers' rights, which is not just black rights, but it affects everyone and disproportionately benefits communities of color, especially black people. So when you look at the kinds of policies MLK was pushing for, you see a lot of alignment with the kinds of policies that Bernie Sanders is pushing for. And by policies MLK was pushing for, I'm referring specifically to the Poor People's Campaign and what Bernie Sanders has been pushing for recently. So let's look at recent history. Joe Rogan actually said his preferred candidate in the last few elections was Bernie Sanders. But guess what? The media never tells you that when they try to paint him as some sort of right-wing, nut job. So at the end of the day, his recent actions show that he supports policies that will disproportionately benefit black people more than any other race. He's used his podcast to bring on people that are talking to the problems in the black community, and he's bringing this to a wide audience of people. So that's what he's used his energy for recently. He hasn't said the N-word. And as soon as the collage was put out, he instantly apologized. He said, you know what? He hasn't used the word since then because he realizes even though the context he was using it in was not to be offensive or to call someone the N-word, the context he was using it in was to tell a story about which that word was involved. So if you look at how it was used, you can't say he was being racist when he used it. You can say that he said a word that's highly offensive, but that doesn't mean that he was trying to assert white superiority to every other race, which is usually your superiority of one race or another, I should say, just by using it. So look at the context of what he said, and you'll see that's not how he intended it. So I agree that, he shouldn't have used it. I agree he was wrong for that, but he instantly apologized. He said he hasn't used it since then, and his most recent actions, highlight the fact that he hasn't, that he actually is an ally to communities of color. So even though there's this big collage going around right now with him, sounding like a racist when it's taken out of context, he is actually an ally. And that's specifically, an example of something a lot of great people have spoken on, saying, like Malcolm X said, the media will have you, hating the victims and, loving the oppressor. And, I know I'm screwing up that quote, but, something along those lines. So if you look at what, is happening today, I think there's a very strong case to be made that Joe Rogan, again, is an ally, not someone who we need to look at as an enemy. And not only is he an ally, he's actually pushing for transparency and truth on a lot of other important issues that also disproportionately impact the Black community. Like, say, even, for example, vaccine passports. He's against those. And what community is disproportionately unvaccinated? Communities of color, Black people. So, a lot of the things he's bringing attention to are conversations that need to be had. He's shifting the conversation in a way that the mainstream media doesn't normally take it, and he's providing us with different perspectives and long-form conversations with people, who it would be good to understand. Whether or not you agree with all of his guests, because I certainly don't agree with all of his guests, what watching his episodes do is give me a better understanding of how people think, which is, one reason why I enjoyed watching his episode with Ben Shapiro, even though I disagree with just about everything, or most of the things Ben Shapiro says. So at the end of the day, I think he's a very important voice. I watch his podcast all the time, and I'm a big fan. Now, how does that tie into critical race theory? Well, all the important facts, that he's pointing out in his episodes, like talking about the war on drugs, talking about systemic racism. He's had Cornel West on too, who's spoken to a lot of the redlining, problems that have happened. He's had Killer Mike on, who's discussed, all kinds of things going on in the Black community. So, what critical race theory, things that have happened to the Black community too. So what critical race theory does is take this knowledge that Joe Rogan is giving in bits and pieces to the masses on his podcast, and not just him, because obviously there are plenty of, Black groups who are trying to raise awareness, about this issue, about these issues like happening with systemic racism. But what critical race theory would do was ensure that at an early age, our students and our children know the reasons why, or a few of the factors that have impacted the situation we have in the world today. Now, what is that situation? The average Black household is worth about $9,000, while the average white household is worth about $10,000. Now, everything I'm about to say is not to discredit white people. It's not to say that white people didn't work hard, for what they have. I'm not trying to say any of that. All I'm trying to say is there are certain things in America's history that have gone in favor of white people to ensure that they get to enjoy, the progress being made in America, while Black people have been purposely excluded from that as a way to kind of keep a permanent underclass to do some of the jobs that, not everyone wants to do, which are, low paying, like more low paying, I should say, usually less skilled jobs. Those are the jobs that Black people have historically been confined to. Now, how does that happen? That happens through the educational discrimination that we see in the education system, where where schools are funded off property taxes, and then Black people are trapped into red line neighborhoods, which get a bunch of environmental waste dumped in them disproportionately more than every other neighborhood. They get charged higher interest rates when they have the same credit level. Studies have confirmed this. And even when they go to sell their houses, it's been, I've seen article after article about how it's coming out. There's also, like a lot of biases in how homes are being appraised based on race. I've seen story after story about how Black families take all the pictures out of their home and then get it reappraised, and all of a sudden the value of their home goes up after they got a terrible figure that way under that way underperformed what they thought they should get for the house. So at the end of the day, you have all these factors, and if education is supposed to be what helps people get ahead in life, and then Black people are systemically given inferior education and less is invested into schools in these neighborhoods, then obviously it's going to be harder for Black people to be competitive. So we have a circular system, and these are just a few examples. I could go on all day about how, systemic racism, all it does is it introduces another roadblock to success. That doesn't mean that, white people don't work hard for what they have. I have white, I know it's a terrible thing to say because I hate it when arguments of race come up and, white folks say I have a Black friend so I can't be racist, but I actually do, have several, a good amount of white friends. A lot of the podcasters and a lot of the content I consume, like some of my favorite people in the world are white people. I'm half white. I'm half Jewish, which in my opinion means white. So at the end of the day, what we need to remember is the big picture. And the big picture is what we need to do to, fix the world is address systemic problems. We need to address the root causes of the problems we have in the world today. So in my opinion, Joe Rogan has been a great voice in helping us introduce the concept of institutional racism without actually using those words. And what we've seen is this huge focus on overt racism, which is different from systemic racism. Overt racism is when, Black people can't walk through the street without having, fruit or vegetables thrown at them or being called all kinds of names, or Black people being lynched. That's systemic race. That's overt racism. And overt racism is not the biggest issue in the world today. While it is coming up more and people are, some of the, bold, emboldened racists, are more comfortable now than they ever have been before, sharing their views. That's generally a very small amount of people. How institutional racism and systemic racism is allowed to continue is essentially because of the fact that most people don't understand it, which is why whenever you hear someone say they're against critical race theory and you ask them about institutional racism or systemic racism, they either don't believe it exists, even though all the data and all the evidence clearly suggests it does exist, or they can't explain it properly and they confuse it with overt racism. So the way we get past this is information. We all need to establish a common reality, and we all need to establish, common facts. So that's why I think, Joe Rogan is actually a huge benefit, to the world, and specifically an ally for Black people. And that's why I think we need to, while we always need to call out overt racism, when Black people are murdered in the street, by what seems to be racist police, when, Black people are, being kicked out of, not being allowed into places, like I've seen in China, simply for being black. I mean, yes, that needs to be called out too, but it's not the biggest problem, impacting the world today. So, I'm sorry, impacting black people today. That would be institutional racism, and also a little bit of a defeatist mentality, and black people, there's definitely a cultural aspect to it too, because black people have been beaten down, so many times. Like, it takes a lot of energy to get back up again. So I think, once black people also start to focus more, and start zeroing in on these problems and get a more unified mindset instead of an individualistic mindset, you'll see a lot of progress being made then. So I think it's a combination of both, self-accountability and addressing the systemic problems that make it not infinitely, but make it harder for people of color and black people specifically to excel in America. So that's just my 2 cents. If you guys thought, what I said makes sense, go ahead, hit the like button, comment below. If you don't agree with me, tell me why. Mention, let's talk about it in the comments. I want, this podcast to be a place where I can, talk with people I disagree with, like libertarians, conservatives. I'm open to all opinions. So I know this is a nuanced, analysis, but if you enjoyed that, like I said, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, interact below, share the video, and make sure you stay tuned, because I have a lot more content coming, including political takes on, what's happening in the world today. I take on, other current events, social issues, and ancient history and religion. So, a bunch of different things. Cryptocurrency and blockchain too. So, all of it. Make sure you subscribe. Again, my name's Jay Scott. Thanks for tuning in.